How are you doing? Dermot Power back here again with another little snippet of Waterford and Irish history. Now, you've all heard of the event there, I think it was Christmas Eve of the First World War, when the Allies and the German soldiers came out and played a game of football. Now, the event I'm going to speak about makes that event during the First World War pale into insignificance, and Waterford men were involved in it. But first we must go back to the start. In the 1840s, there was a group of revolutionaries in Ireland called the Young Irelanders. One of the leading lights was Thomas Francis Meagher from Waterford, who was born in where the Granville Hotel is today. And he became very friendly with another very intellectual guy called John Mitchell from the north of Ireland. I tell you, they were such good friends that Meagher actually wore a ring with the likeness of John Mitchell, that was his name, on the ring. So John Mitchell and Thomas Francis Meagher were arrested because of their revolutionary activities, and they were sent to Van Diemen's Land off the coast of Australia. It was a penal colony. So they escaped from there, went to America, and were very, very popular on the lecture circuit in the United States. So we jump forward now to the 1860s, and the American Civil War broke out. Meagher sided with the North, with the Union, and he formed the brigade called the 69th. There were several other brigades which he commanded, but that was his, not the 69th was his brigade. John Mitchell sided with the South. As I said about John Mitchell's sons, he had three sons. There were John, James and Willie. He lost two of his sons to the Confederate cause. Willie was killed and John was killed in Fort Sumter. A 300-pound shell exploded close to him and his body was shattered, so to speak. And as he lay dying, his last words that were reported were, "I'd gladly die for South Carolina, but oh, I wish 'twas for Ireland." His other son, James, the only fellow to survive the war, again was badly wounded and lost an arm, and he was retired to office duties. And his son, a fellow called James Pureye Mitchell, ironically became one of the best known and most famous mayors of a Union city, New York, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, which happened on the 13th of December 1862. John Mitchell was there visiting two of his sons, James and Willie, and they were involved with the Confederate forces there at Fredericksburg. He was probably, or maybe even not aware, that his great friend Thomas Francis Meagher was on the other side of the river, because a river divided the city from the Confederate position, which was essentially on a place called Mary's Heights. And the river was called the Rappahannock River. And it's very important to remember that name, because this plays a very big part in the story. So John Mitchell was visited his two lads. He was just about to leave and bade goodbye to him, and as he was walking away, the guns boomed out from the Union positions across the river, and off he went. At 12 o'clock on the 13th of December 1862, the Irish Brigade was sent forward to attack the heights, the Confederate position on Mary's Heights. They were totally unaware that the brigade they were going to fight was a Confederate brigade belonging to a fellow called the General Cobb, and they had a green flag with a harp on it. They were the Irish Confederate Brigade, and only through the dust and the smoke from the guns could they see green flags belonging to Meagher's Irish Brigade coming forward. So we had Irish Confederates fighting Irish Union. The Confederates were very, very well entrenched on a position on Mary's Heights, and as the Union, the Irish Brigade, came along, they were mowed down. 6 times they attempted to get to what was known in later history as the Sunken Road, and they were massacred. It was unbelievable slaughter. Now, I just want to give you a little description from Meagher's mouth. What he said was, he marched out that morning with 1,200 men. The next morning, only 280 presented themselves for active service. The rest were either dead or wounded. It was unbelievable slaughter. The Battle of Fredericksburg essentially decimated the Irish brigades, and there were almost no more. Mayer looked for permission to go back to New York and raise another brigade, and he was refused permission, so he resigned in May, I think it's 1863, I beg your pardon. But I'll give you an idea of the amount of people that were killed and the officers. I have a report here, and it says Colonel Nugent. Now remember, listen to the names, all Irish names. Nugent, he was severely wounded, commanding the 69th. His regiment had 19 commissioned officers and 210 enlisted men. Its loss was 16 officers wounded and 112 men killed and wounded. Now, you're talking about half of the lot and almost half of all the officers. Colonel Patrick Kelly commanded the 88th New York Volunteers. The 88 numbered 23 officers and 229 men. So 12 officers, that's again exactly half of the amount of officers, were killed. And 110 men killed and wounded, that's again half of that. The 16 Pennsylvania Volunteers, this regiment marched on the field with 17 officers and 280 men. Its loss was 12 officers and 77 men killed and wounded. Colonel Richard Burdens, commanding the 28th Massachusetts, entered the action with 16 officers and 400 men, of whom 7 officers and 149 men were killed. Major Joseph O'Neill commanded the 63rd New York, numbered 17 officers and 145 men. Its loss was 7 officers and 37 men killed or wounded. Major Joseph O'Neill commanded the 69th New York, number 17 officers and 145 men. Its loss was 7 officers and 37 men killed and wounded. Now, they became famous, but it's more or less forgotten about in Ireland and indeed to a great degree in America. General Lee, he was the officer commanding all of the Confederate forces, and he said regarding the Irish Brigade, and I quote, "The gallant stand which his bold brigade," that's Mar's brigade, "made on the heights of Fredericksburg is well known. Never were men so brave. They ennobled their race by their splendid gallantry on that desperate occasion. Though totally routed, they reaped harvests of glory. Their brilliant though hopeless assaults on our lines excited the hearty applause of our officers and soldiers." Now, what happened was that as the Irish were coming, I'll be playing a little video from a film called Gods and Generals, and it very, very accurately depicts the charge of the Irish Brigade on the Battle of Fredericksburg. It's a brilliant piece of movie. As I said, the name of the movie is Gods and Generals, and it's extremely accurate. But in that, you will actually see the Irish Confederates shooting at their fellow Irishmen, and the Irishmen falling. As they were retreating, they came forward again, shot again. It got to the stage that many of the Confederate soldiers could not bear to look at the action anymore. They closed their eyes and just fire their guns. A thud and a scream would be heard. That was it, another Irishman gone. So one of the officers, the Confederate officers, took off his hat and he began to wave it and start shouting, "Hurrah, hurrah," for the Union officers or the Union Irishmen. And the whole of along Mary's Heights, all the Confederate Irish stopped firing their guns, took off their hats, started applauding and cheering the Irish Brigade belonging to Mar. It was an unbelievable sight. Now we have to jump forward to that night. There was a Union captain, his name was Dennis Downing. He was a cartman. The wounded and the dying and the dead were still on the field. They hadn't been collected because of sniping. He was drinking a cup of coffee outside his tent, and he looked at the battlefield and he started singing, "Ireland boys, hooray! Ireland boys, hooray! We'll toast old Ireland, dear old Ireland, Ireland boys, hooray! And another voice in another company took up the singing. And another voice in another company took up the singing. It went on then to the regiment, on to the brigade. And for 6 miles along the Rappahannock River, do you remember I mentioned that river before? 6 miles down the Rappahannock River, all the Irish in all the different brigades, companies and regiments began to sing. From here to Tramore, you could say. If you can imagine that, from here to Tramore, there was all Waterford men, Kilkenny men, Tipperary men, from God knows where, all around Ireland, who had fled the ravages of the famine on both sides, because most of the Union men would have landed at New York during the famine. That's where they would have disembarked, coming over from Ireland. An awful lot of men disembarked down in Savannah in the south. So they were in the south and they joined the Confederates. And that's the way it was. But anyway, when the Union guys stopped singing, they couldn't believe it. It sounded like an echo coming from the Confederate position. Ireland boys, hooray! Ireland boys, hooray! We'll toast old Ireland, dear old Ireland, Ireland boys, hooray! And they all sung together, Ireland boys, hooray. That song was written in 1858 and was very, very popular on the battlefields of the American Civil War. It's an unbelievable story, absolutely unbelievable, lost to Irish history, lost to a great degree to American history. But hopefully with this little video it will become known. Wouldn't it be lovely to recreate that here in Waterford on the celebration of the tricolour, that we could organise a group, 1,000 or more people, all along the quays of Waterford, stretching outside along the Tramore Road out, and we all sing together in memory of those Irishmen and those Waterford men who lay down their lives for whatever side, Union or Confederate, they were on. Let's sing out with "We'll toast old Ireland, dear old Ireland, Ireland boys, hooray!" Hope you enjoyed the story. Talk to you soon.
Deep in Canadian woods we've met from one bright island flow. Right as the land we tread, but yet our hearts are with our own. And there we leave the shanty small while fade the autumn day.